The rain came quietly on the temple stones like it always did in the Valley of Mexico, soft at first, then steady. If you stood still enough on the causeway to Tenochtitlan, you could hear the drops speak to each other, murmuring along the rooftops and canals, as if the city itself sighed with each touch of water. There is a certain stillness in that image, isn't there? The distant mountains, the floating gardens, the scent of wet maize in the air. But beneath this tranquility, there pulsed a society more intricate than we often recall, one where order was not just a preference but a sacred duty, where justice was not arbitrary but tethered to stars and stone calendars. Tonight I invite you to drift with me, slowly, like a canoe on Lake Texcoco, into the curious justice system of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, or more precisely, the Mexica people believed that every act, no matter how small, had cosmic significance. To steal a tamale was not merely theft, it was an imbalance in the sacred web that held the world aloft. That imbalance had to be corrected, not through vengeance, but through restoration. And yes, sometimes restoration was rather, let's say, imaginative, but let's not leap to the punishments just yet. Let us first understand the soil from which they grew. Tenochtitlan, at its peak, was a city of over 200,000 souls, a metropolis shimmering atop a lake, crisscrossed with canals and alive with markets, song, and ceremony. In such a place, order was essential. Imagine it, streets busy with sandal-footed merchants, priests robed in jaguar skins, children darting between chinampas, those floating gardens so brilliant they made the marshland bloom. Amid this liveliness, law acted as the quiet spine of the city. Their laws, known as tlacuiloli, when recorded in codices, came from centuries of wisdom and oral tradition. But unlike modern justice systems, Aztec law wasn't just about protecting rights. It was about appeasing gods and ensuring the sun rose tomorrow. That meant every case carried a weight far beyond the accused and the victim. Take, for instance, the principle of Teotl, a divine energy that pulsed through all things. To disrupt that energy through crime meant disrupting the balance of the universe. A broken rule didn't just hurt society, it annoyed the cosmos. And an annoyed cosmos was dangerous business. Thus, the role of the judge in Tenochtitlan was part magistrate, part priest, part meteorologist. One had to sense not just the letter of the law, but the mood of the gods. Punishments were as varied as the crimes, and we'll be visiting many of them in the chapters ahead. But what's most surprising is that the system, while strict, was also strangely fair, if at times bewilderingly creative. There were no jails in the Aztec Empire, you see. Punishment was immediate and symbolic. If someone stole from the marketplace, they might be shamed publicly, dressed in rags, paraded through the streets, forced to return more than they stole. But repeat the crime, and the penalty could escalate, quickly, often dramatically. And yet, one of the most remarkable things, judges were held to standards just as high. Corrupt judges could face execution. Imagine that in today's world. Your parking ticket invalidated because the magistrate was tossed into a lake for bias. But before we get ahead of ourselves with floggings, dismemberments, and ceremonial lizard suits, yes, we'll get there. We must pause here in this first moment. Imagine you are an Aztec farmer, your foot brushing against obsidian blades hidden in the earth as you walk home from the temple. You have a small dispute with your neighbor. Perhaps they borrowed a cloak and returned it stained with pulque. Do you shrug it off? Or do you report it to the neighborhood Kalpulli chief? And if you do, what justice do you expect? Aztec justice was communal. Cases were often judged locally before escalating. Young offenders might be given milder sentences, nobles held to stricter codes. Justice was like a woven mat. Each thread mattered, each knot deliberate. There's a quiet wisdom in that, isn't there? As the rain thickens over our imagined city and the torches flicker along temple steps, we find ourselves on the threshold of stranger tales to come. For in the coming parts we shall meet thieves who were turned into dancing skeletons, adulterers who faced trials involving chili smoke, and merchants punished for the crime of excessive flattery. But not yet. Let us not disturb the night too fast. Let's allow the water to pool in the corners of the stone streets, let the air grow heavy with warmth and wood smoke, and let the drums from the far pyramid beat slowly into sleep. Next time, we'll follow the trail of a cacao thief and discover why chocolate in the wrong hands could lead to a fate more terrifying than death. But for now, breathe deeply. The sun has set behind the feathered temple. The stars keep their silent watch, and the law waits patiently in the still hours before sunrise, when the mists curled like smoke from Lake Texcoco and the birds began their soft gossiping among the reeds. There was one sound that broke the quiet, a whispered clatter, the sound of a gourd, half empty, of cacao beans tipping over behind a market stall. In the Aztec world, cacao beans were more than just food. They were currency, sustenance, offering, and pleasure, all wrapped into one. One could pay taxes in cacao, purchase a canoe, or even bribe a city official, though that was a crime, as we'll soon see. A single cacao bean might buy a tomato. 100 could buy a night's companionship from a charming performer in the House of Flowers and Music. And so, when a young man named Topiltzin crept through the shadows of the Tlatelolco marketplace, with a pouch of stolen beans, he wasn't just committing theft, he was destabilizing the economy. Or so the judges would claim. Topiltzin wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a fisherman's son from the eastern shores, with hair always messy from wind and lake spray. His mother had died during the last eclipse, a bad omen, and his father, though kind, had fallen into drink and melancholy. The theft had not been bold, just careless. He had seen the merchant walk away for morning prayers, the basket of cacao left unattended, a decision made in a heartbeat. But Aztec society had little room for such decisions. That afternoon, the sun beat hot and lazy over the square. The judges sat beneath a canopy of reeds, fans waved by apprentices, scrolls of prior cases laid out in orderly rows. These were the Tecpan, the ruling judges, known not only for wisdom but for memory like jaguar claws, sharp and impossible to escape. Topiltzin was brought forward by the market patrol, flanked by 2 stern elders of his Kalpuli, the neighborhood unit that had raised him after his mother's death. It was a quiet shame, the sort that carried weight beyond the individual, because when one child failed, it reflected upon the whole Kalpuli. Their whispers would echo long after the sentence was served. "Do you deny?" asked the lead judge, a stooped man with gold rings and a brow like carved obsidian, "that you took these beans from the basket of the merchant Xochitl?" Topiltzin swallowed. His voice was hoarse. "I was hungry," he said, "but I will return them." The judge paused, then nodded with something that might have been sympathy. "You cannot return what has been unbalanced. The theft is a wound in the world. Now it must be sealed." Punishment varied with the crime and the criminal. Had Topiltzin been a noble, the sentence might have been death. Nobles were expected to embody virtue. But for commoners, first offenses were met with severity, not cruelty. In this case, the punishment was one both theatrical and memorable: public humiliation and restitution through labor. Topiltzin would be stripped to a loincloth painted with black spots to resemble the cacao pod and made to march the length of the market square with a placard around his neck. "I stole from the hand that feeds." But that wasn't all. For 30 days he would serve the merchant whose beans he had taken, grinding cacao into paste from morning to night, fingers stained and arms aching. No fire to warm the home, no sweetened drink for himself, just the scent of roasted cacao filling his lungs day after day, never tasting a drop. And should he fail to appear or attempt escape, then a second tier of punishment awaited: binding to the market pole and light scourging with cactus thorns witnessed by his Kalpuli. And yet, this was not meant to destroy him. Aztec justice, even when severe, often held a mirror to the soul. The goal was not annihilation, but restoration. In time, Topiltzin completed his service. He returned to his Kalpuli, leaner, quieter, but not broken. The elders gave him bread. His father, finally sober, placed a hand on his shoulder without words. And perhaps most importantly, the merchant Xochitl, though once furious, offered him work the following season. Better to have an honest thief, she said dryly, than a dishonest priest. That, too, was Aztec wisdom. You see, while the laws were rigid, they often held room for redemption. The same society that believed in gods thirsting for hearts also believed in second chances, especially for the young. It was a contradiction that made the empire feel both fearsome and strangely humane. There's a slow beauty in that. Justice not as a blunt sword, but as a winding canal, sometimes cold, sometimes cleansing. And now, as the stars blink above Tenochtitlan and the drums begin their night rhythms, we fold away this tale of beans and balance. Tomorrow, we step deeper into the stranger side of Aztec law. Next time, we'll meet a man punished not for what he did, but for how sweetly he said it. A tale of compliments, deception, and the odd dangers of being too charming. But for now, sleep beneath the hum of the empire. Let the cacao bloom in your dreams. Even the warmest breeze in Tenochtitlan could carry warnings if one listened closely enough. And if you stood long enough in the marketplace, beneath the bright awnings of woven fiber, near the stalls of dried chilies and tamarind, beside the quiet cellars of obsidian combs and carved bone flutes, you'd eventually hear the name whispered with a mixture of admiration and worry. Izel. Now, Izel was not a noble, nor was he a priest or warrior. He had no bloodline worth scribbling into a codex, no ancestral claim to fields or feathers. What he did have, though, was a voice. Not the loud kind that commands armies, but the soft kind. The kind that slips into your ear like river mist and wraps around your thoughts before you even notice. He could compliment a melon until it seemed more precious than jade. His words could turn an ordinary day into a shimmering dream. And therein lay the problem. For in the heart of Aztec society, where precision was sacred and harmony protected with laws older than memory, words had weight. A misplaced phrase could do more damage than a misfired arrow. And Izel's compliments, they were a little too sweet, a little too smooth, like honey that never quite crystallized. Let me tell you how it happened. It began, as many quiet disruptions do, with something beautiful. Her name was Kitlali, meaning star, and she carried herself as such. She was not the most stunning woman in the noble quarter, nor the most powerful, but she had a stillness that drew attention without asking for it. Her huipil was always clean, her hair braided with care, her gaze calm but unwavering. One afternoon, Kitlali stopped at the flower market. Izel, leaning against a pillar of sun-baked stone, observed her approach, not with hunger, not with lust, but with something far more dangerous in the Aztec world: poetic interest. As she picked through bundles of marigolds, Izel stepped forward and said, in that soft voice of his, "The sun must be searching for you, for its warmth lingers in your shadow." Kitlali smiled, just a flicker, polite but surprised. She said nothing, only tucked the compliment away in some quiet place. It might have ended there, but Izel was not the sort to leave silences unfilled. Over the next several days, whenever Kitlali passed through the market, he offered more. Gentle comparisons to hummingbirds, to dew on aloe leaves, to the morning star in its first hour of light. Each compliment was delivered with reverence, never vulgar, yet always personal. And in a society where words were weighed like gold dust, this was unsettling. You see, Kitlali was married. Her husband, a minor officer in the Eagle Warriors, was not known for his tolerance. And more importantly, in Aztec, custom noblewomen were not to be spoken to casually, especially not by commoners, especially not in verse. Soon whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to formal complaints. It wasn't just jealousy. It was order being threatened. If every market poet could speak to a noble's wife with careless charm, what came next? Chaos in the Kalpuli? Disobedient wives? Daughters dreaming of love matches? A line had to be drawn. Izel was summoned to the Tekpan, the palace of judgment. He came dressed plainly, respectfully. He bowed low before the three elder judges, their robes embroidered with symbols of maize, fire, and wind. One judge, his voice deep as a storm, asked, "Did you or did you not use words of affection toward Lady Kitlali, wife of warrior Omakuatli in the public square?" Isel responded softly, "I did not touch her. I did not follow her. I only spoke what I felt was true." "Truth," another judge replied, "is not always a defense. Even honey can drown an ant." There was no physical crime, no theft, no violence. But in Aztec law, disruption of household harmony was considered a serious offense. It was called Xochiquicani Tlapapalalistli, the poetic disorder. Yes, they had a name for it. Punishment was not cruel, but it was crafted to rebalance what had been disturbed. Isel was sentenced to 5 days of public humbling. He was to wear a robe stitched with bright feathers, mocking the hummingbirds he often praised. He carried a clay flute silenced with wax. Around his neck hung a sign carved in wood. "Sweet words should nourish, not deceive." Each day he was marched slowly through the market. People stared, some laughed, a few felt pity. On the third day a child offered him a flower. He smiled, opened his mouth to thank her, but a guard tapped his shoulder, shaking a pouch of chili powder. He stayed silent. By the 5th day, Isel no longer walked with pride. His eyes searched the ground. His compliments remained trapped behind, his teeth like birds behind stone walls. When the punishment ended, he returned to the marketplace, quieter now. His voice, once airy and lilting, had become measured. He still greeted familiar faces, but no longer with poems. Just simple words. It was said that Lady Citlali never spoke of him again, but her smile, people whispered, never quite vanished. And what of Isel? Some say he took up a new craft, carving messages into stone. Others believe he left the city entirely, traveling south where words were still welcomed like rain. Whatever the truth, his tale remained. Passed between old women and young lovers, between priests and poets. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was a lesson. In the Aztec world, where every act had weight, every word could tip the balance. Too much sweetness could sour the pot. Too much praise could provoke the gods. And so we close our eyes on Isel's story, letting his silenced flute fade into the warm winds of dusk. Tomorrow, we shall open a gourd of a different sort. In part 4, we dive into the strange, fermented world of pulque, the sacred drink of gods and peasants alike, and the curious fates of those who drank a little too freely. But for now, breathe deep. Let the stars rise slowly. And remember, in Tenochtitlan, even love was expected to obey the Yarusain law. There are many kinds of silence in the night. The silence of sleep, soft and full of dreams. The silence of morning, heavy and dry. And then there is the silence that follows laughter when it has gone too far. That, dear listener, is the silence we explore tonight. In the world of the Aztecs, where laws were carved as carefully as obsidian blades, few things were as paradoxical as pulque, a cloudy, thick, and faintly sweet drink made from the fermented sap of the magi plant. Revered by gods, offered to spirits, and consumed with reverence, but only in the right time, place, and age. To understand why pulque could lead to punishment, one must first understand its sacredness. The Aztecs believed pulque was a gift from the goddess Mayahuel, whose many breasts fed the earth with sweetness. It was said she had hidden herself in the heart of the agave, her sap becoming nourishment, her essence becoming ecstasy. And yet, this gift was dangerous. The laws were clear. Only the elderly, those over the age of 52, the terminally ill, and certain priests during specific rituals could drink pulque freely. For all others, consumption was heavily restricted. This wasn't prudishness, it was control. Intoxication, in Aztec eyes, was a moment of cosmic vulnerability. To be drunk was to lose your balance in the grand web of the universe, and an unbalanced soul risked inviting disaster. And so we come to our tale, the story of a man named Coyotl, whose name meant coyote, and who lived much like the animal. He was named for clever, agile, and not entirely trustworthy. Coyotl was a weaver by trade. His patterns were admired in the market, complex geometric spirals that looked like water moving in stone. But his true passion lay not in thread, but in the pale gourd tucked under his bench. Pulque. He did not drink to escape. No, Coyotl drank. To think, or so he claimed. The gods speak softer when your tongue is heavy, he would say with a grin. For months, he drank in secret. A little in the morning, more at night. At first, the neighbors only noticed his humming. Tuneless, but persistent. Then came the talking, to himself, to birds, to statues. Finally, one afternoon during the Feast of the Wind God, Coyotl stood in the center of the marketplace wearing a loincloth made of his own weaving, and declared that he had discovered a new calendar, one with 13 days in a week, and naps every fourth day. The crowd chuckled, but the market guardians did not. Coyotl was seized. The gourd was examined. The frothy remnants smelled unmistakably of pulque. He was brought to the tekpan, his mouth still curling with the tale of a joke no one understood. The judges did not laugh. The law stated, if a man under the age of 52 is found drunk without sacred cause, he shall be stripped of honor and corrected through ritual exposure. Ritual exposure. A gentle phrase, but not so gentle a practice. Coyotl's sentence was to be paraded through each market district, dressed not in shameful rags, but in exaggerated regalia, a paper crown, a cloak covered in feathers and mud. He was declared tlazotequini, or lover of excess, and at each district a town crier would read his offense aloud. But that was only the beginning. On the third day, he was taken to the Templo Menor and made to stand beneath a stone carving of Mayahuel. There he had to recite 10 praises to the goddess, each time naming a virtue of restraint while holding a full gourd of pulque. He was forbidden to drink it. The ceremony was not meant to mock, but to cleanse. When it ended, the pulque was poured, onto the earth a final offering, and Coyotl was given a single roasted cacao bean. To remind you, the priest said, that sweetness must be earned. What makes this story linger in the memory is not its harshness, but its gentleness. Yes, Coyotl was punished, but he was not broken. The Aztecs believed in correction, not cruelty, so long as the offense did not repeat. And indeed, Coyotl returned to his weaving. His patterns became even more intricate, perhaps reflecting the strange clarity that follows shame. It was said, he never touched pulque again, or at least never when anyone was watching. But why such care over a drink? Why such laws? Because to the Aztecs the mind was a temple. To let it fall into disrepair through indulgence was not just a personal failing. It was a threat to the harmony of all things. And harmony was everything. Pulque was not evil. It was divine. But divinity, misused, could invite disaster. And that perhaps is the heart of Aztec justice. The belief that everything, every word, every drink, every act, had its place and time. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet of your room, imagine Coyotl at his loom once more, his fingers moving. Like water, his brow furrowed not from drink but from thought. Perhaps a small smile touches his lips, not from intoxication but from memory. And now, the market square quiets once again. The drums soften, the moonlight spills across stone and thatch, and the city dreams. In Part 5, we shall enter the world of marital law and the delicate line between loyalty and transgression when chili smoke became a test for adultery. But for now, let the night remain still. Let your breath slow, and let pulque drift away, like fog beneath the stars. The scent of chili can carry many meanings: comfort, heat, a home-cooked meal at dusk. But in the Aztec world, it could also mean shame, or truth, or judgment. Tonight, we step quietly into the homes of Tenochtitlan, behind the reed walls and beneath the beams hung with dried herbs. There, beyond the bustling markets and sacred pyramids, lay the smallest but strongest foundation of society, the household, and with it, the expectations of trust and loyalty that came with marriage. Among the Aztecs, marriage was not simply a union of hearts, it was a sacred contract between two Calpuli neighborhood communities, bound by ritual, witnessed by gods, and reinforced by law. A husband and wife were expected to be companions in duty, labor, and spiritual alignment. Infidelity, therefore, was not only a personal betrayal, it was seen as a threat to social and cosmic balance. But how does one prove such a thing? Let us imagine a home, modest but warm. A husband named Tecuatl, a merchant of clay pots, comes to the local council with a quiet grievance. His wife, Malinal, he suspects, has been unfaithful. He has no proof, only silences that last too long, glances that stray too quickly, and the unsettling way she began wearing her hair differently. The elders listen. They do not judge hastily. Adultery, especially by women, was a serious accusation, one that could lead to punishment as severe as death, but only if guilt was proven. So the test is proposed. The trial by chili smoke. In Nahuatl, it was called Tlachihualipopoca, literally the smoking of the one accused. The ritual was not meant to torture, but to summon truth. Here is how it unfolded. On the appointed day, Malinal was brought to a quiet courtyard beside the Calpuli hall. The judges, her husband, and a midwife stood present. A small clay brazier was prepared with a blend of dried chili peppers, Zacatl, chilcostly, and a few bitter herbs. The mixture was chosen for its sharpness, for its ability to provoke reaction without leaving lasting harm. Malinal was told to kneel. The brazier was lit. Thick, spicy smoke began to curl through the air, sharp enough to sting the eyes, twist the breath, make even the strongest warrior weep. She was instructed to breathe it in, not for long, just enough to feel it. And while she breathed, a priestess asked questions, simple ones, then harder. Are you faithful to your vows? Have you welcomed another into your bed? Do you deny your husband's suspicion? The belief was this: if the accused were innocent, the gods would strengthen her. Her breath would remain steady, her gaze clear. But if she had guilt, the smoke would betray her. She would choke, cough, weep. Malinal held steady for a while, her shoulders stiff, her face blank. But then came the moment. Her eyes watered. She turned her face. Her hand reached up, not in prayer but to cover her mouth. A sign, a small one, but enough. It wasn't proof, but it was suggestion. The judges wisely did not stop there. In many cases, witness testimony would follow. If neighbors had seen comings and goings, if a suspected lover had been seen at her home in unusual hours, those testimonies would carry weight. Sometimes, a child would speak, or a servant. But Malinal's case was murkier. The chili smoke had spoken ambiguously, and her husband, though angry, had no other evidence. So the final option was invoked, the marriage balance test, a symbolic trial where both husband and wife were made to grind corn side by side, silently, for one full cycle of the sun, from dawn to sunset. No words, no glances, just the shared labor of daily life. If either broke the silence, if either cried, shouted, or turned away, judgment would be drawn. In this case, Tecuatl wept, quietly, near the noon hour. A tear dropped into the masa. It was not guilt. It was grief. The judges declared the bond damaged but not broken. No execution, no exile. But the couple would undergo 1 year of ritual penance, living in separate parts of the home, abstaining from conjugal rites, performing daily offerings to Xochiquetzal, goddess of love and fidelity, and perhaps that was punishment enough. Aztec justice often danced between the symbolic and the stern. While punishments could be brutal, especially for repeat offenses or confirmed adultery, there was also space for nuance, ritual, and rehabilitation. Not every accusation led to a stoning. Not every whisper became a sentence. But the chili smoke? Ah, the smoke stayed in people's minds. The image of it, the curling spice rising through the reeds, the tears it drew, it became its own kind of legend, a reminder that trust once questioned had its own heat. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine that smoke. Gentle now, just a suggestion. Let it drift upward into your thoughts like incense. Not to accuse, not to punish, but to cleanse. Next, in part 6, we shall step outside the home and into the schools of the Aztec children, and discover the curious punishments awaiting those who dared misbehave in the calm halls of knowledge. But for now, let your thoughts grow soft. Let your breathing slow. And may no smoke disturb your dreams. In the great city of Tenochtitlan, where the pyramids touched the stars and canals stitched together floating gardens, even children were bound to the rhythm of order. There is a kind of silence that lives in old schoolhouses, the silence of chalk, of breath held during lessons, of eyes cast downward under a teacher's gaze. And in the Aztec Empire, that silence was more than academic. It was sacred. Unlike many ancient civilizations, the Aztecs believed that education was for everyone. Boys, girls, rich, poor, noble, and common. No child was to grow up wild. The empire itself depended on it. Boys attended either Kalmakak, the school for nobles, or Telpochcali, the school for commoners. Girls were trained at home or in institutions to become priestesses, midwives, or household leaders. But the purpose, regardless of status, was the same: to form a person of Toltecayotl, a life of wisdom, moderation, and artful living. But let us not imagine these schools as places of gentle encouragement and midday naps. No, the Aztec approach to education was strict. To err was not merely to make a mistake. It was to disrupt the harmony of one's path. And discipline? It came in many forms. Let us meet a boy named Tochihuitzin, a 13-year-old son of a humble woodcutter. He had just begun his studies at the Telpochcali. His mornings were filled with sweeping the school courtyard, carrying firewood, and memorizing speeches honoring the gods. Afternoons brought lessons in military drills and singing hymns in Nahuatl meter. Tochihuitzin was bright, but he was also curious, and one day he whispered a joke during a sacred recitation, a joke about the wind god's breath smelling like fermented maize. It was not well received. The instructor, an elder named Ixtolan, raised an eyebrow. He did not shout. He simply walked over and placed a ball of burning incense beside Tochihuitzin's desk. This was the first level of warning. A symbolic gesture. The smoke meant, "Your behavior clouds the sacred air, let it clear." Tochihuitzin, confused but emboldened by the laughter of a classmate, repeated the joke. The next day, he returned to find his sandals missing. Barefoot, he was told to sweep the entire courtyard with a feather brush. Inefficient, slow, humbling. That evening, he was made to sleep outside, wrapped in a thin mat beside the school's small shrine to Quetzalcoatl. The wind was cold. These were not punishments meant to harm. They were meant to shape. But what of worse offenses? Some boys ran away from their studies, sneaking out into the night to flirt, to drink, or to escape the long hours of ritual practice. These were called Tepochcali fugitives. Their fate was vivid. Upon being caught, the boy would be brought before the instructors, who would light bundles of chili peppers and throw them onto a small fire. The boy would be made to inhale the smoke, head covered with a cloth to keep the vapors in. This punishment was called chilchilistli, the correction by spice. It was not lethal, but it was unforgettable. Another method involved tying the offender to a post and dropping cold water on his head, one drop at a time for an hour. The rhythm was meant to teach patience, reflection, and the passing weight of consequence. Yet perhaps the most fascinating was the symbolic starvation. This punishment was reserved for laziness. A child who failed to complete his duties was made to sit before a feast, tamales, roasted turkey, cacao, fruits, and forbidden to eat a bite. He was told to recite a chant of gratitude for food, all while his stomach growled. The lesson? Appreciation through absence. Some might call it harsh. But consider this. These students would grow into warriors, priests, judges, midwives, and leaders. Their minds and spirits had to be honed as sharply as obsidian blades. There was no room for softness in a world balanced on ritual and expectation. Yet, even in discipline, there was care. The instructors did not hate their students. They were stern, yes, but they were also guides. A boy who endured his punishments without complaint might later be praised publicly, given more responsibility, invited to ceremonies. Tochihuitzin, after his courtyard sweeping and cold mat sleep, never joked again during ritual recitations. He became known for his sharp memory, his clean robes, his silent respect. Years later, he would teach at the very same Telpotkali, and when a young student once laughed during a chant, Tochihuitzin simply set down a clay bowl of incense and walked away. Balance restored. Education in the Aztec world was never just about knowledge. It was about alignment, with society, with nature, with the gods. Discipline was the bridge. And now, as the schoolyards of the empire grow quiet beneath the stars, we too can rest. Let the chilly smoke fade. Let the songs of memorized hymns echo gently in your dreams. And know that every punishment, every whisper of correction, was just another step in a long, careful journey toward harmony. In Part 7, we'll walk among the stone courtyards of the Tiu artisan guilds and meet a sculptor punished not for breaking the law but for making a statue too beautiful to be ignored. But for now, let your thoughts drift like feathers on wind. The school bell has rung, and the lesson is rest. In the quiet hours of dawn, when even the wind treads gently through the stone corridors of Tenochtitlan, there is one place that never truly sleeps, the artisan's quarter. It hums like a hive, not with bees, but with chisels, brushes, weaving, shuttles, and the low murmur of voices shaping clay, wood, and story into forms meant to last longer than the hands that made them. Among the artisans lived a man named Tenoch, a stone carver, lean and wiry, with the careful hands of a spider and the eyes of someone who had stared too long at things no one else noticed. He had trained since boyhood in the Guild of the Sculptors, known as the Tolteca, a term that implied not only skill but sacred responsibility. In the Aztec world, artists were not mere laborers. They were Teotl-Ictlamacasqui, offerers of the divine essence through form. Their work could honor gods, teach children, shape cities, but it could also offend, or worse, disrupt. Tenoch was assigned a commission by the priests of Tlaloc, the Adat rain god. A new idol was to be carved for the Eastern Temple, meant to replace an older statue worn smooth by incense and weather. It was a high honor, a test of both hand and spirit. He worked in silence, day after day, alone, save for the steady tapping of obsidian chisels and the occasional call of a bird too curious for its own good. He carved not just what he was told, but what he felt. Visions of water swirling in stone, the softness of rain etched into hard volcanic rock. And when the statue was revealed, the city gasped. It was breathtaking. Tlaloc's eyes, wide and glistening, seemed to ripple like actual water. His gaping mouth no longer looked monstrous, but mournful. Tears carved along his cheeks flowed so realistically, children asked if they were wet to the touch. Even the priests stood frozen. For a moment, no one spoke. And then, the whispers began. Some said Tenoch had gone too far. The idol, they claimed, was not just beautiful, it was too human, too emotional. Tlaloc was meant to inspire awe, even fear, not pity. To make the rain god weep with sadness rather than roar with thunder. It felt wrong. One priest muttered that the statue resembled not a god, but a man grieving. Another feared it would offend the deity it meant to honor. Others whispered darker thoughts, that Tenoch had infused himself too deeply into the stone, that his sorrow had displaced the divine. Soon, a tribunal of temple officials was convened. Tenok stood before them, hands still white with dust. He was not defiant, he was not afraid, but he was confused. "I carved what I saw," he said. "The rain feeds, the rain mourns, the rain is gentle before it is violent. I only gave him the tears I feel when the corn drinks its first water." The judges murmured. It was a poetic defense, but not a legal one. In Aztec law, artistic blasphemy, though rare, was a recognized offense. To depict a deity in a way that altered their spiritual identity was considered a form of cosmic distortion. And distortion required correction the sentence, not execution. Tenok was too valuable for that. Instead, he was given a punishment known as Tekpatl Yolilistli, the blade of life. He was to remain alive and active, but barred for 5 years from touching stone. A sculptor who could not sculpt. Each week, he had to report to the artisan guild and sit among the apprentices, not as a teacher but as a listener. He was allowed to speak, to sketch, to advise, but never to carve. He was given a small bowl of wet clay each morning to keep his hands busy, but the moment he shaped it into form, it was taken away. Some considered this merciful. Others said it was a slow, careful unmaking. Tenoch did not weep, but he did grow quieter. His former apprentices would visit him, bringing drawings to show or asking questions about curve, weight, meaning. He answered softly, never bitter. But when they asked what he would have carved next, he only smiled. Years passed, and then quietly, his sentence ended. On the first day of his freedom, he rose before the sun, walked to the edge of Lake Texcoco, and picked up a small stone. Not volcanic, not perfect, just a pebble, and he carved, not a god, but a raindrop, not because he feared the gods, but because he finally understood their weight. In time, the original statue of Tlaloc was moved, not destroyed, but placed in a private temple garden where only certain priests could see it, not out of shame, but out of reverence and caution. You see, the Aztecs understood something many modern people forget, that beauty, unchecked, can be a kind of rebellion, and rebellion, even in art, must bow to balance. So tonight, as the stars trace rivers across the sky and the city settles into a hush, let your breath slow. Let the weight of Tenoch's chisel fade from your thoughts, and may your dreams be carved gently, with care. In Part 8, we'll descend into the bustling courts of market justice, where a woman was, punished not for stealing, but for haggling too well. But for now, let silence be your stone and sleep your sculptor. In the shadow of the great Templo Mayor, where the gods whispered through wind and drumbeat, another kind of power pulsed daily through the heart of the empire. The market. Tlatelolco Market, the largest in all the Aztec world, could host up to 60,000 people on a busy day. Imagine it, thousands of stalls bursting with everything from obsidian blades to live ducks, cacao beans, carved jade, embroidered tunics, baskets of maize, sweetened tamales, dried fish from the coast, and perfumes made from crushed flowers. It was more than commerce. It was ceremony. It was politics. It was survival. And like every vital structure in Aztec life, the market was bound by rules. Prices were monitored. Trade was overseen by officials known as Pochtecatlatok. False weights, counterfeit beans, or unlicensed stalls could result in swift punishment, sometimes public scolding, sometimes worse. But tonight's tale is not about theft or fraud. No, it is about Nanetl, a woman from the southern Lake District, known for her woven mats and more famously for her tongue. She had a gift. She could bargain a canoe from a merchant in exchange for a smile and 2 baskets of reeds. She could talk a stonecutter into dropping his price just by complimenting the curve of his chisels. Some said she once talked a judge into paying extra for a gourd of pickled cactus. People came to watch her haggle, not to buy, but to learn, to laugh, to marvel. But as her reputation grew, so too did the complaints. She drives prices down, some sellers said. She confuses buyers, others murmured. But it wasn't until she spoke to a young, inexperienced cacao seller and persuaded him to sell her a full pouch for the price of one bean that things changed. The boy's uncle was a member of the merchant guild, and he was not amused. Within a day, a case was opened. The charge? Tianquispan Tlatlacoli, disruption of market balance through manipulative bargaining. Now let us pause. To our ears, it may sound absurd. Who punishes someone for haggling too? Well, but remember, the Aztecs saw the market not as a game, but as a carefully tuned system. Prices weren't just economic, they were moral. Too much profit was greed, too much discounting was destabilizing, and manipulation, even through charm, was a breach of matal, the sacred principle of balance. Nanetl was brought before the market court. 3 merchant judges, each with more wrinkles than a dried squash, and the eyes of men who had counted 2, many beans in their life, they asked her, "Did you deceive the boy?" She smiled. "I only offered what I felt was fair." "Did you pressure him?" I spoke kindly. "Did he understand the true value of his goods?" She hesitated. Perhaps not fully. There it was. The court ruled that while no theft had occurred, she had abused informal influence to distort the agreed value of goods, a violation of merchant ethics. The sentence was unusual. Nanetl would spend 10 days as a silent vendor. She was assigned a stall in the very heart of the Peru market. Her mats were on full display. But she was forbidden to speak. No calls to customers, no haggling, no jokes. If someone asked a question, she could only point. If they offered too little, she had to accept. If they overpaid, she had to bow. Each evening a bell rang, and she had to chant the phrase, "A word too sharp may cut the cord of trust." At first it was humiliating, but something strange happened. People began to visit her stall in sympathy. Some paid double, not because of her silence, but in defiance of it. Others came just to sit nearby, saying nothing, as a gesture of quiet solidarity. By the 7th day, a priest of Tlazolteotl, the goddess of forgiveness, visited her and left, a small flower beside her stall. When her sentence ended, she was welcomed back not with scorn but with laughter, and yet her haggling changed. She still bargained, but gently. She asked, then listened. She gave, then offered. She came to say, "The best price is the one both sides can remember without shame." Perhaps that was her true gift. The market thrived. The young cacao seller learned his lesson. And Nanetl? She taught her daughter how to negotiate with both voice and silence. So tonight, as the stars flicker above the sleeping city, think of that market stall. The warmth of woven mats under your feet. The hum of voices rising like incense. The quiet power of a word not spoken. In Part 9, we'll drift into the strange realm of temple law, where one unlucky man was punished for walking too casually past a sacred altar. But for now, let your mind rest. Let your dreams find their own price. And may your night be as fair as the markets of the sun. There are steps you take with purpose, steps that echo with certainty, and then there are steps you take when you've forgotten where you are. In the Aztec world, forgetting where you were, especially near a temple, could cost more than a moment of embarrassment. It could cost you honor. Or worse, it could bring shame to your Kalpuli. Let us walk carefully now into the story of Quoshin, a man of 32 winters, a porter by trade, who lived in the southern canals of Tenochtitlan. Every morning he carried bundles of maize, textiles or pottery from the outer districts into the city center. His shoulders were strong, his sandals worn, his back as familiar with weight as his feet were with cobblestones. Quoshin was not irreverent, merely distracted. One bright morning, the city was alive with the scent of copal and fresh tamales. Priests prepared for the mid-sun ceremony at the Hui Teocalli, the great temple. The steps were swept, the drums began to hum, and smoke drifted. Lazily upward, Quoshin, walking his usual route, cut across the temple courtyard with a bundle of reeds. He had passed there 100 times before. But on that day his mind was elsewhere, on his debts, his wife's illness, the crack in his canoe's hull. And so, he walked, not bowed, not silent, but casually. A priest saw him, then another. They said nothing at first. But when Quojin paused, briefly, at the base of the pyramid to stretch his back and sigh, the air changed. It was not the pause that troubled them. It was the way he did it, relaxed, as if he stood outside a market stall or near a canal bench, not at the foot of the gods. He was summoned later that day to the court of temple conduct. The charge, Yolkui Kani Netlayako Listli, conduct unbefitting, the sacred zone. Now there was no law against walking near a temple, but how one walked mattered. The great temple was not just a building, it was the axis of the universe. Every step within its shadow was a step through eternity. The judges, clad in eagle feathers and blue-stained robes, questioned him gently. "Did you forget where you stood?" "I meant no disrespect." "Did you know the gods were being honored that hour?" "I did, but I did not see the time." "Would you stretch your limbs before your emperor?" "No." "Then why before your gods?" There was no anger in their tone, only a heavy disappointment. Quojin was not deemed wicked, but careless, and in a city where carelessness could ripple through the sacred weave of time, that was punishment enough. He was assigned a 3-day ritual of awareness. From sunrise to sunset, he was to walk the sacred precinct in bare feet, tracing a spiral, path mapped with obsidian flakes. At regular intervals he was made to stop, kneel, and whisper the phrase, "Where I stand, the gods breathe." At night, he was to sleep beside the temple steps, not on the platform, but at its base, facing east, so that the rising sun would awaken him with its first warmth. Each day, he was given a new task to reflect on place and presence. On day 1, he swept the outer steps with a tail of jaguar fur. On day 2, he carried incense without spilling a grain. On day 3, he painted a mural of footprints, his own, over a wall reserved for penitent offerings. There were no lashes, no humiliation, only repetition, intention, and silence. By the 4th dawn, Quojin walked differently. His steps slowed. He paused before entering a courtyard, and when he passed a child playing near the altar, he gently redirected the boy, not with scolding, but with a hand placed softly on the shoulder and a wordless gesture toward the stone. It was said that afterward, he resumed his porting work. But now, he greeted each sacred space with a whispered breath, a brief lowering of the head. He began teaching others the 5-step prayer, 5 slow paces of respect, before any shrine, even a small one. The judges never summoned him again, and in time he became known not for the infraction but for the way he walked, the man who remembered where he stood. There's a quiet lesson in that. In our modern lives, we rush from place to place, unaware of the stories beneath our feet. But in Tenochtitlan, a careless sigh near the wrong wall could disturb the gods, and the gods, they were always watching, not with wrath but with expectation. So tonight, as you rest your feet under the softness of blankets, think of Quojin. Think of each step as a sentence, each pause as a punctuation, and each space you occupy as sacred. In part 10, we'll follow a messenger who dared delay his delivery and learn how even tardiness could draw divine reprimand in a world where time was everything. But for now, let your body settle, let your steps still, and may your dreams be walked with reverence. There is a moment in the early dawn when the sky shifts from indigo to ash, a hush before the birds stir, before the lake's mist begins to rise. In Tenochtitlan, that moment was sacred, for it marked the passage of time, one of the most revered forces in the Aztec cosmos. The Aztecs didn't merely observe time. They worshipped it. Their calendars, their rituals, their architecture, all were shaped around the sacred cycles of sun and moon, of maize and star, of human breath and divine will. To be late, therefore, was not a minor failure. It was a disruption, a ripple in the harmony of things, And no one knew that more intimately than the Painani, the runners. These were not casual couriers. They were elite, trained from youth to sprint with grace, endurance, and memory. No written scrolls, just the message held in voice and breath. Their path stretched like arteries from Tenochtitlan to distant towns, over hills, through forests, across narrow bridges of rope and stone. And among them was a young runner named Aztec. He was fast, not the fastest, but consistent. He could run for leagues without tiring, his footsteps light on the earth like deer prints. He was known for punctuality so precise, people claimed he could predict the sun's height with his heartbeat. But one day, he was late. The message was simple: an update on ritual supplies sent from the lakeside town of Cuitlahuac to the high priests of Huitzilopochtli. It had to arrive before mid-sun, so that the ceremonial dyes could be prepared in time. Aztec ran, as always. But midway, a strange thing happened. He paused. Not long. Perhaps 2 minutes. Perhaps 3. He had seen a hawk circling above a tree, a rare pattern of flight. He stopped to watch it. Something about its path unsettled him. A superstition. A flicker of doubt. When he resumed running, the sun had crept just a finger's breadth higher than expected. And when he reached the temple steps, sweating, breath ragged, the drum that marked the ritual hour had already sounded. He was 10 minutes late. The priest accepted the message in silence, then turned and walked away. Aztec stood there, still, stunned. The realization settled in like dust. 10 minutes. But in a world where entire empires rose and fell by the turning of the calendar stone, 10 minutes was enough. He was summoned the next morning to the House of Time, a stone building marked with symbols of the Tonalpohualli, the sacred 260-day calendar. There, 3 elders, known as Tonalpuque, readers of fate and time, questioned him. Did your legs fail you? No. Was your path blocked? No. Did you fall? Were you injured? No. Then why? He hesitated. I saw a sign, he said softly. A hawk, flying in a spiral. I thought it might mean something. The room fell quiet. One elder closed his eyes. Another inhaled deeply, as if reading the meaning behind the boy's breath. You were not chosen to read signs, the first finally said. You were chosen to carry them. It was not anger. It was grief. For to them, Aztec had abandoned his duty, not out of laziness, but out of ego. He had allowed personal interpretation to outweigh the divine rhythm of time. His punishment was precise. For 1 full moon cycle, Aztec was relieved of running duties. Each day he was made to sit by the central calendar stone, marking time aloud, chanting the name of each hour, each passing sun segment, each count of breath between water drips in a bowl. He could not speak to others. He could not move from the stone until sunset. At night he wrote in charcoal across the temple courtyard, "Time is not mine to keep. I am only its voice." Each morning the rain would wash it away and he would write it again. After 30 days he was offered the chance to return. He declined. Instead, he asked to train new runners, to teach not just speed, but stillness. Not just breath control, but humility before the sun. He taught them a new saying: run fast, but never faster than the hour that calls you. Aztec never ran the long roads again. But his students became some of the most trusted Painani in the empire. He died many years later, peacefully, under a sun that was precisely where it was meant to be. Tonight, let us remember Aztec, not for the moment he paused, but for the wisdom he found in stillness. In part 11, we'll descend into the royal court, where a noble faced punishment not for treason or theft, but for wearing colors forbidden to his bloodline. But for now, may your breath flow like perfect time. May your rest arrive not early, not late, but exactly when it should. In a land where the gods wore feathers and the sun demanded blood, even the smallest thread of cloth could speak volumes. To live in Tenochtitlan was to live inside a tapestry. Every corner of the city burst with color, dyed cottons, painted, glyphs, gemstone mosaics, woven banners fluttering from rooftops. But these colors were not chosen at whim. They were law. You see, the Aztec Empire had sumptuary regulations, rules that dictated who could wear what, based on class, military rank, family line, and sacred duty. To wear the wrong color was not a fashion faux pas. It was an offense. A declaration, intentional or not, that you belonged in a place you did not earn. Enter Tequihua, a minor noble from a western province, son of a merchant prince and a priestess of the maize goddess. He was clever, well-liked, fond of poetry and stone garden design. His tunics were always tasteful, his manners precise. But beneath the calm of his reputation lay something more dangerous: ambition. Tequihua had recently returned from a diplomatic visit to Texcoco. There, he had seen robes dyed in the forbidden hue of royal violet, a deep blue-tinged purple extracted painstakingly from rare seashells and reserved for the emperor, his family, and the highest priests of the sun cult. He could not stop thinking about it. He returned home, and quietly through traders and whispers acquired a cloak. Short, ceremonial, beautifully dyed in that exact shade. He told himself it was for private use, for poetry recitations, for admiring himself in candlelight. But one morning, during the festival of the flowering moon, Tequihua arrived at the Eagle Court wearing the cloak. Perhaps he forgot what he was wearing. Perhaps he wanted to be seen, and he was. Silence fell. Not because of outrage, but because of the danger the garment posed. In that single shade, Tequihua's body now carried the visual language of a prince. Servants bowed instinctively. A merchant stepped aside. Even a mid-ranking general paused. By midday, a scribe had informed the House of Rule. By sundown, Tequihua was summoned. He arrived unrobed, respectful, but the stain of the color lingered, like a scent. The tribunal of 5 nobles sat before him, cloaked in shades of red, gold, and sanctioned indigo. The man in the center, his face calm as still water, asked, "Do you know why we've called you?" "Yes." "Do you know what color you wore?" "Yes." "And do you know who may wear it?" "Yes." "Then why?" Tequihua bowed his head. "I admired it. I meant no offense. You admired what was not yours. You walked where you were not invited. The color did not lie. It told the world a falsehood, and the world listened. There was no need for argument. The infraction was clear, but the punishment and was chosen carefully. Tequihua was not imprisoned, nor was he beaten. Instead, he was given the cloak of shame. For 7 days, he was made to walk the public squares wearing a tunic dyed in mud brown, with a sash that read, "I borrowed color not meant for me." He was assigned a young boy from the weaving guild to walk beside him, pointing and announcing, "This man confused cloth for crown." Worse, he was forbidden to wear any color for 1 full cycle of the moon. Only undyed cotton, plain, unadorned, like a servant. Even his sandals were stripped of decoration. In Aztec society, this was profound. To be seen without pattern or hue was to be visually erased, a reminder that status was earned, not stitched. Tequihua bore it with quiet dignity. He did not protest. He did not hide. Some said he smiled at the boy who mocked him. Others said he began writing poetry again, using only gray pigments and water-stained paper. When the moon completed its turn, he returned to court, not in violet, but in soft red, a color suited to nobles of his standing. He bowed and said simply, "Color speaks before we do. I will let mine whisper." In time, his story became a cautionary tale for ambitious youths, but also, curiously, a poem, a quiet line shared by weavers across the empire. We die with plants, we die with shells, but pride stains deepest of all. Tonight, let your eyes rest upon gentler colors. Let the violet stay tucked away behind your lids, deep and royal, unreachable. Let your dreams be woven in soft reds, warm ochres, gentle cottons. And when you wake, remember every color carries weight. Every hue has history. And in Tenochtitlan, even a thread could tip the balance. In Part 12, we will step into the sacred kitchens of the priesthood, where a cook was once punished for serving tamales the gods found displeasing. But for now, sleep gently. Let your cloak fall, and wear only peace tonight. In the temples of Tenochtitlan, even the steam from a tamale carried prayers. It curled through the rafters like incense, rising into the air with more than just the scent of masa and chile. It carried intent, respect, a silent whisper to the divine. The gods of the Aztec world were not distant figures. They were present in everything, in stone, in wind, in maize. To feed them was not a metaphor, it was a literal daily act. Not through mouth, but through ritual, through offering. And in that sacred kitchen, deep within the shadowed hall of the rain god's temple, worked a man named Allen. Allen was not a priest, but he was chosen, a temple cook, trained from youth in the sacred preparations. How to fold maize just so, how to grind the chili with rhythm matching the heartbeats of the earth, how to steam without boiling, how to wrap with care as if the tamale itself were a prayer folded in flesh. His hands were steady, his breath calm. But one day, he made a mistake. It was not a mistake of laziness or defiance. It was a mistake of haste. That day, the rains had failed to come. The priests were tense. The offerings had to be prepared before the next sun segment. Allen, under pressure, instructed his apprentices to reuse a batch of maize from the prior evening. Slightly sour. Not spoiled, but not fresh. The tamales looked perfect. They were placed upon obsidian plates, adorned with petals and jade crumbs, and carried up the pyramid to be burned in offering. The smoke rose as it always did, but that night thunder cracked. Not in the sky, in the stone. A statue of Tlaloc in the side chamber fractured. A hairline split across its brow. The priests gasped. A sign, a warning. Divination followed. The fire, patterns were read. The maize kernels were cast. The message was clear. Displeasure. The gods had not accepted the offering, and the offering had been tamales. Word spread quickly. The temple cook was summoned. Allen knelt before the tribunal of ritual overseers. 3 priests, 1 midwife, and a reader of smoke. They asked gently, but firmly, "Did you prepare the food with full spirit?" "I did." "Was the maize fresh?" Allen paused. "It was not freshly ground, but it was still good." "The gods are not guests," one priest said. "They are life itself. Would you offer your mother leftovers on her deathbed?" The silence that followed was heavy. Allen did not argue. He bowed his head. "The fault is mine." The punishment was symbolic, not cruel, but deeply humbling. For 14 days, Allen was to prepare no food at all. He was to fast, taking only water with herbs, and spend his hours scrubbing every stone of the temple's kitchen, courtyard, and offering tables. He was given a simple chant to repeat as he worked. Fresh food for old gods, fresh heart for ancient flame. He was not banished. He was not whipped. But his absence from the sacred kitchens was profound. The apprentices whispered. The priests waited, and when the rains returned, soft and steady on the 15th morning, he was invited back. But first, he had to cook. Alone. 1 tamale, not for the gods, but for the wind. He placed it atop a reed mat beside the temple's eastern threshold. The breeze took the steam. The offering was made, and only then was he permitted to step into the kitchen again. Allen never reused maize again. In fact, he became known for over-preparing, insisting on freshness, even if it meant discarding perfect-looking dough. He trained his apprentices not just in technique, but in tone. How to grind corn with humility. How to thank the comal before cooking. And his tamales. They were said to steam straighter, to unwrap more gracefully, to carry a scent that made Even the statues lean slightly forward. Tonight, as you tuck into your own blankets, think of the warmth of that kitchen fire. The care folded into each shape, the way food, even in silence, can become a kind of speech. Let your thoughts rise like steam. Let your worries melt like lard into dough, and in your dreams, may the gods be pleased. In part 13, we shall enter the courts of the priesthood once more, where a young novice was punished not for disobedience but for asking too many questions. But for now, rest easy. No offerings are needed here, only sleep. In the temple schools of Tenochtitlan, the first thing a novice learned was not a chant or a ritual, or a sacred name. It was how to listen. Silence was not emptiness. It was a container, a space where the divine could echo. Within the smooth, stone corridors and incense-hazed chambers of the temple schools, words were rare and precious, each one carefully chosen, each one a step upon a delicate path. But there was one boy who walked that path, with too many questions. His name was Xochitl the flower bird, a name light and fluttering, not unlike his mind. He was 12 years old, newly inducted into the training halls of the priesthood. His eyes were wide, his hands always fidgeting, and his thoughts, oh, they flew. From the moment he arrived, the questions began. Why do we burn copal and not flowers? Why must we rise before the sun if the gods do not sleep? If blood feeds the gods, do they ever become full? At first, the elders smiled. Curiosity was not forbidden. But in the temple, curiosity had its limits. It must be held like incense, smoldering gently, never flaring. Xochitl, however, could not contain his flame. During morning prayers, he whispered questions between verses. During sacred fasts, he asked why the gods preferred suffering over song. Once he dared to wonder aloud, if the gods created us, who created them? That last question echoed too loudly. He was taken aside by Tlenamakli, an elder priest with a face like cracked stone and a voice like hollow wood. You are not being punished, he said, but you must be paused. And thus began the rite of listening, a gentle but solemn corrective ritual for over-inquisitive novices. For 20 days, Xochitl was forbidden to speak. Not a single word. He was given no duties involving song or recitation. Instead, he was assigned to sound-keeping, observing water drips, wind chimes, the soft thud of footsteps, and the fall of corn kernels during offerings. Each sound was to be recorded with symbols, drawn onto paper made of bark. Each night he sat by the temple fire, not praying aloud, but listening to the silence between the drums. If he wished to ask a question, he had to place a stone in a bowl, 1 stone per thought, and wait until morning. The next day, he would be asked if he still wanted to ask it. Most days he removed the stones, but not all. On the 12th night, he kept a single stone. When asked, he replied by writing. If silence is sacred, how do the gods hear our prayers? Tlenamakli read the note and said nothing, but he placed a feather beside it, a symbol of breath, of unseen movement, of words not spoken, but felt. By the 20th day, Xochitl had changed. He still wondered, of course. His mind was no less agile. But now he waited, he watched. He held his questions like seeds, choosing when to plant them. When he finally spoke again, his first words were, I think my questions are still good, but maybe they must wait until my ears are full. And the priests nodded. Years later, he became one of the most beloved temple instructors, known not for what he said, but for how long he would wait before saying it. He taught his own novices the same rite, but with one change. He allowed them to draw their questions in colors, not just words. Sometimes, he would say with a small smile, the gods answer us in light, not sound. So tonight, in the silence of your room, let your own thoughts soften. Let your questions settle like dust in morning sunlight. They do not need answers now, only stillness. In part 14, we shall step outside the temples into the laws of the fields, where a man who harvested too early was punished not with loss of crop, but with a year of forced planting under the stars. But for now, sleep without questions, and let the answers find you in dreams. In the Aztec world, the soil was never just dirt. It was a skin, a memory, a body that remembered every cut, every seed, every footprint left too soon. To farm was to serve the gods with your back bent and your hands dirty. There were calendars, carved in stone and sung by elders. Maize, beans, squash, all had their own stars, their own shadows. You did not plant with guesswork. You planted when the sky gave permission. This is the story of a man named Tlamatini, whose name meant the one who tries to know. He was a quiet farmer, living near the misty edges of Lake Xochimilco. His chinampas, those floating gardens built of woven reeds and lake mud, were admired for their neatness, their balance, and the way they caught the light at dusk. But one season, the rains came late. The maize plants trembled in the wind. The stalks leaned awkwardly, and the old women muttered, "Too tall, too fast. The roots are unsure." Tlamatini worried. His youngest child was ill. The stores were low. The priest said to wait until the second moon of Etzalcoatlistli, the season of grain ritual. But he looked at the sky, at the weak sun, at the curling tips of his corn, and made a decision. He harvested early. He didn't boast, he didn't sell in the market. He simply took what he needed quietly, under the veil of morning mist. But in Tenochtitlan, nothing stays quiet long. A boy from the neighboring plot saw him. The story reached the field stewards, those appointed to monitor planting rituals and ensure celestial harmony. And within 3 days, Tlamatini was brought before the Council of Seasons. The accusation, Sopan Tlayolilistli, disruption of the sacred agricultural order. This was not mere disobedience. In Aztec cosmology, harvesting too early was an insult to Cinteotl, the maize god. It implied distrust in divine timing. Worse, it risked inviting drought or sickness or failed planting in the years ahead. The council questioned him gently. Did the sky instruct you to cut? No. Did the priest give you leave? No. Then why? Tlamatini bowed, his head. My child was hungry, I feared waiting. A long silence followed. A young scribe began to write something, then stopped. An elder looked toward the south window where a storm cloud curled lazily on the horizon. Finally, they spoke. You feared the wrong thing. They could have fined him, taken his land, publicly shamed him. Instead, they chose something more fitting. He would serve one full ritual cycle, a year and 9 days of nocturnal planting. Each month, on the second and third nights, he would be tasked with helping the astronomer priests plant symbolic plots by starlight. No sun, only the moon, only breath, only silence. These were ceremonial plantings, offerings more than food, meant to honor the Tonalpohualli, the sacred calendar. Most were done in secret, at hours when the stars aligned with the gods invisible, and it was grueling work, and humbling. Tlamatini had to rise long before the birds. He walked barefoot through wet reeds. He carried soil in painted bowls. He recited the names of stars instead of prayers. Each planting came with a lesson. Under the moon of Tecuihuitantli, he was told, do not rush what is meant to ripen. Under Huaymicailhuatl, the great feast of the dead, he planted in silence for those whose crops failed long ago. Under Tlacaxipihualistli, the month of flaying, he scattered beans while hearing tales of past droughts, when men offered even their skin to beg for rain. At the end of each session, he marked a small stone with ash. He carried them in a pouch at his side. By the end of the year, the pouch was heavy. On the last night, beneath a full moon, he was brought to the top of a low ceremonial mound. The priests lit a fire. He placed each ash-marked stone into it one by one, and when the fire died, they gave him a new pouch, empty. You have given back your error, said the priest. Now wait. He did. He waited a full month before planting his next crop, and when the maize came, it came thick, tall, and golden. The harvest was shared among neighbors, and from that season forward, Tlamatini was asked to teach young farmers, How to read the sky, not just the soil. He no longer feared the stalks curling too fast. He had learned to trust the rhythm of things. Tonight, as your own breath slows, think of the field under moonlight. The hush of stars above damp earth. The sound of seeds falling like small promises into waiting darkness. In part 15, we will drift, from soil to stone, into the courtroom of a mapmaker who was punished not for lying, but for drawing the truth too clearly. But for now, sleep in season, and may your dreams bloom at just the right time. There are truths that whisper, and truths that shout, but the most dangerous truths are the ones drawn in silence. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, just beyond the market district and the temple courtyards, there stood a modest hall with wide clay floors and reed-covered windows. Inside, light poured in gently, filtered through fluttering curtains. The walls were covered not with paintings but with maps, curved coastlines, zigzag trade routes, boundaries drawn like stitched seams across imagined cloth. This was the house of the Tlacuiloque, the scribes and mapmakers, keepers of ink, geometry, and quiet clarity. Here worked Matlalxochitl, whose name meant blue flower. He was not a priest, nor a warrior, nor a merchant. But he held a different kind of power, the ability to translate land into symbol, distance into order, uncertainty into lines that told a story. He was calm, meticulous, patient, known to sketch in silence for hours, his mind walking terrain he had never physically crossed. In the Aztec world, maps were not simply navigational tools. They were state documents, sacred instruments, sometimes even prophecies. A wrong bend in a river could cause a war. An extra hill could raise taxes. A forgotten village could become a forgotten people. So when the High Merchant Council commissioned Matlalxochitl to update the southern trade map, it was no small task. The purpose seemed simple. Redraw the path from Tenochtitlan to Chalco, marking stops, markets, tribute towns, safe passage zones, and sacred waypoints. The map would be copied, engraved in codices, taught to young merchants. Accuracy was essential, and Matlalxochitl, as always, was thorough. He spent 3 moons traveling by foot, canoe, and horseback. He walked roads that twisted through mountain passes, slept in village temples, listened to the breath of rivers, and spoke with elders whose memories held paths long erased by weeds. It was in the 5th week, along a ridge in the forested hills of Tepexpan, that he stumbled upon a settlement not listed in his instructions. It was small, perhaps 50 homes, nestled beside a stream with terraced gardens and a simple shrine. But it was bustling. Children playing, maize drying on reed racks, pottery stalls neatly arranged near the water's edge. Most curiously, at the village's heart, a stone tablet bore the glyph of tribute, the symbol for cotton next to cacao. Matlalxochitl asked around discreetly. Elders confirmed they had once paid tribute directly to the Chalco district, but after a dispute, their levies were no longer collected. They existed quietly, in between. He took note. Not out of mischief, not out of rebellion, but because it was there. The land had spoken. He listened. When he returned to the House of Scribes, he began to draw. The map he submitted a month later was, by all measures, magnificent. The rivers flowed cleanly. Mountains rose with correct slope. Cities glowed with glyphs of importance. Trade paths were traced like delicate veins. But in one corner, small but unmistakable, was that unregistered village, labeled with proper symbols, marked as active, alive. It took only 2 days for the Merchant Council to notice. They did not summon him immediately. They conferred, argued, consulted with the tribute office. There were implications. If this village still existed, had tribute been neglected? Had it been siphoned? Or had someone hidden its presence to avoid retribution? Either way, the map had made it visible, and that visibility was the problem. When Matlalxochitl was finally summoned to the council hall, He wore the simple white robe of a scribe, his inkwell pouch at his belt. He bowed respectfully. One elder opened the discussion. "You were asked to draw the known paths." "I did," he replied. "But you added what was not listed." "I added what was present." Another counselor leaned forward. "Do you understand what it means to record what others have forgotten?" "Yes. It means they can remember again." There was a long pause. Then came the verdict. Matlalxochitl would be punished not for lying, but for telling too much truth too clearly. The charge was tlacuiloli mitotalisli, scribal disruption, through unregulated revelation. His sentence was as symbolic as his work. For one full ceremonial cycle, 260 days, he was banned from drawing real places. He was commanded instead to produce only imaginary maps, floating islands, invisible rivers, kingdoms of smoke and wind. His drawings were displayed not in the archive, but in the Poets' Hall, labeled, "To be admired, not believed." Each week he had to recite aloud, "Truth is not only what is seen, but what is allowed to be seen." Privately, his fellow scribes sympathized. Many began quietly visiting the forgotten village. Some even included it in marginalia of other maps. Just a dot, just a shadow. Matlalxochitl did not resist. He drew his dreamscapes with the same care he gave to borders and milestones. He painted stars that flowed into seas, pathways that curved, back into themselves. But he never stopped remembering that village, and when his sentence ended, he was quietly reassigned, not to maps, but to teaching. He instructed young scribes in ethics of visibility, how to record what is, and how to survive what follows. "Every map is a mirror," he would say. "The land shows itself, but it cannot speak. That is your burden." Matlalxochitl died in peace, his hands stained with soot and pigment, a rolled codex beneath his head. It was found later that he had hidden a copy of the southern map, the true one, beneath his mat. The village he marked? It still exists in whispers. Some say it never vanished again. Some say it disappeared precisely because someone once dared to draw it. Tonight, let your own mind unfold like parchment. Trace quiet rivers through the fields of sleep, and remember, even what is forgotten waits to be seen. In part 16, we will leave the parchment behind and move to the sacred drums, where a royal musician struck the wrong beat and was punished not with silence but with a song that could never end. In Tenochtitlan, the drums did not just mark time, they shaped it. There were drums for war, drums for planting, drums for birth, for eclipses, for tears. The great Huahuetl stood like guardians beside the pyramid steps, cylindrical, carved, from cedar, with deer-hide tops stretched so tight that even the gods were said to listen when they were struck. To play the drum was not entertainment, it was invocation. The rhythm called down divinity. A wrong beat could ripple through the ritual like sour water through fresh maize, and one man made that mistake. His name was Ekatzin, the Little Echo, a title once affectionate, now bitter. He had been born into rhythm. His mother was a dancer, his father a court musician. As a child, Ekatzin would tap rhythms on his knees as he listened to priests chant before dawn. By 13, he was apprenticed to the drum house where he studied the Tonalpohali calendar through beat and silence. He learned the sacred patterns, some so old no one dared change them, the rain rhythm, the eclipse rhythm, the slow heartbeat. Of the sun god at rest, Ekatzin rose quickly. By 21, he was named chief drummer of the great temple, a rare honor. It was his job to set the opening rhythm of the Feast of the Flayed God, one of the most solemn and eerie ceremonies in the Aztec calendar. During this rite, dedicated to Xipe-Totec, priests would wear the flayed skins of sacrificial victims to symbolize renewal through suffering. The rhythm for the opening dance was known as the beat of falling bark, soft, erratic, reverent. It could not be rushed. It must never be doubled. But on that spring morning, as the incense thickened and the sky turned the color of old bone, Ekatzin struck the drum with a rhythm that was wrong. Too fast, too firm, He realized it as soon as his hand came down. One beat, then another, both slightly too close. A ripple, barely a moment. But in sacred time, it was a fracture. The dancers hesitated. The priests looked up. A whisper passed through the plaza like a shiver. Ekatsin's hands froze. He tried to correct, to soften, but the rhythm was already broken. The ceremony continued, but the silence behind the chant was heavy. The gods, it seemed, had tilted their ears. Later that day, Ekatsin was summoned to the temple council. He stood, barefoot before the high priest of Sipe Totec, his drum slung silently behind his back. "Do you know the pattern you played?" the priest asked. "Yes." "Do you know what it caused?" "Yes." "Then you know your error." Ekatsin bowed his head. "I allowed the excitement of the crowd to enter my hands. I failed to close the outer world before I struck." The high priest was not cruel, but neither was he lenient. In striking too, soon you pulled the god from rest before he was ready. You disturbed the veil. The punishment was not to take his drum, but to take his rhythm. For the next 2 cycles of the moon, Ekatsin was sentenced to play continuously, not loud, not publicly, but without end. Each day from sunrise to sunset, he sat inside a small stone chamber in the temple's inner ring. There he was given a single huhuetl, a metronome stone, and a stool. He had to play, not songs, but simple, steady time, no flourish, no pause. The chamber had no decoration, only a narrow slit that let in a line of sunlight. When the sun reached the far wall, the playing could stop. When it returned, it began again. He was fed simple maize gruel, allowed only short breaks. No visitors, no music, but his own. The priests called it the rite of returning rhythm. Some whispered that the monotony would drive him mad, that the beat, repeated thousands of times, would bury his mind beneath it like a drum buried in wet earth. But Ekatsin endured. He focused not on the sound, but the silence between strikes. He let his breath guide his hands. He began to see each beat not as punishment, but as prayer. When his sentence ended, he emerged blinking, thinner but quiet. He was offered a chance to return to his role. He declined. Instead, he asked to serve as a teacher of beginning rhythm, to guide children not in performance, but in listening. He taught them the beat of clouds, the pace of walking in reverence, the echo of a single drop in a bowl, and when they asked him why he no longer played in ceremony, he simply said, "The gods once heard my hurry, now they hear my stillness." In time, Ekatsin became known not for his mistake, but for his recovery. He composed a new rhythm, a soft triple beat known as the Patience of Stones, which was later used in ceremonies for healing. And each year, during the Feast of the Flayed God, a new drummer took his place. But somewhere, among the dancers and firelight, a single soft beat always echoed, and it was his. Tonight, as your heart finds its own rhythm, think of the quiet in-between moments, the spaces where breath slows, where time lengthens. Let your pulse follow the steady drum of sleep. In part 17, we step away from sound and enter the realm of dreams, where a soothsayer was punished for interpreting a noble's dream too literally and too honestly. But for now, may your dreams find their own pace. May no beat rush them, and may the silence be just as holy. There are doors in the human mind that only open while we sleep. To the Aztecs, dreams were not random shadows flickering behind the eyes. They were sacred paths paved by the gods, walked by the soul in silence. Each one was a message, a warning, a mirror. And those who could read these dreams, Tlapahualiztli Ixquich, counters of the invisible, were part oracle, part philosopher, part careful weaver of words. Among the most gifted of them was a woman named Teyacapan, which meant the first in line. She lived quietly near the eastern edge of the city, in a thatch-roofed dwelling where wind moved freely and the walls were lined with old symbols painted in charcoal and red clay. Her face was soft, but her eyes were deep. She did not need to raise her voice to command respect. She only needed to look at you. It was said she could hear a dream before the speaker even opened their mouth. People came to her for many reasons. Some were warriors who had seen too much blood. Some were girls who dreamed of water and feared pregnancy. Some were old merchants who dreamed of falling and wanted to know if they should retire. Teyacapan listened to all of them. She never rushed her words. She often asked for silence before speaking. "Let the dream settle in the bowl," she would say, "before you try to drink from it." But one night, just as the moon reached its highest point, a man came to her door with feet too clean and eyes too sharp. He was young, tall, and dressed in embroidered cotton. Gold lines at his sleeves, a necklace of carved jade beads. His name was Chimalhuac, which meant shield of the waters. He was not a stranger. Word had reached her before he arrived. Court official, rising quickly through the ranks, son of a noble family in the Western District. Proud, intelligent, ambitious. He bowed, but not too low. He did not remove his sandals. "I need your counsel," he said. "I have had a dream, the same dream, 3 times in 7 nights. Teyacapan offered him cacao. He refused. He sat, but not fully. His body stayed stiff, perched like a man who never quite relaxed. Only his hands betrayed his fear. Tightly woven fingernails pressing into the pads, he spoke carefully. "In the dream, I stand in a wide field of flowers. They bloom quickly, opening as I walk. Ahead of me is a tree, enormous, golden-leaved. Birds sing in its branches. Then a shadow falls. Fire rises. The tree splits down the middle. The birds scream and fly away. The roots tear from the ground and I am pulled beneath." He looked at her, eyes narrowing. "I want to know what it means, and I want it to stop." Teyacapan nodded slowly. She didn't answer immediately. She asked questions about his mood, his meals, his thoughts before sleep, the color of the birds, the temperature of the dream. She listened to the spaces between his words, the fear hiding behind his formality. Then, she said, "The field is your future, broad, fertile, blooming quickly. Too quickly. The tree is your name, your status, your achievements, but the fire is truth. A truth you have hidden or that someone else will reveal. The split is a decision, one you fear to make. The roots are what lies beneath. Exposure, not punishment, but revelation." She let the words hang, like wet cloth left to dry. Chimalhuac's jaw clenched. "You mean I will fall?" "No," she said gently. "You will be seen." He stood. "I came to have a dream removed," he said, "not to be told fables." Teyacapan bowed slightly. "The dream is not mine to remove. It will stop when it is done speaking." He left without saying goodbye. She thought no more of it, until 3 days later when 2 court messengers arrived at her doorstep with scrolls marked in red ink. She was summoned. The tribunal was held not in a temple, but in a high council, room reserved for quiet matters, the kind that carried weight but not volume. 3 judges presided, all old, all noble, all with faces that did not betray emotion. Teyacapan stood barefoot before them, her shawl simple, her eyes calm. One judge spoke. "You are charged with tlapahualistli tlacayotl, an interpretation given without sanction, causing disturbance in a house of standing." Another added, "The noble Chimalhuac has withdrawn from court proceedings. He claims confusion, unrest, and spiritual disarray following your words." "I told him what his dream said," Teyacapan replied. "Nothing more." "But you told it plainly," said the third judge. "And truth, when spoken without care, can cut deeper than lies." There was no further debate. She was not sentenced to death, not exiled. Her punishment was simple, symbolic, and strict. For 1 full Tonalpohualli cycle, 260 days, she was forbidden from speaking any dream interpretation aloud. She could still listen, but her responses had to be given in images only, drawn in ink or carved in clay. No voice, no direct words, no clarity. It was meant to humble her, to weaken her reach. But Teyacapan adapted. She taught herself to draw with her left hand, so her right could remain on the person's wrist, feeling their pulse. She painted their dreams as tapestries, full of suggestion, shadow, and invitation. Those who truly sought wisdom still found it, but those who wanted comfort turned elsewhere. When the sentence ended, Teyakapan did not return to spoken readings immediately. She chose her words more carefully, offering them slowly, like seeds dropped one by one. Not every dream must be explained, she told her students. Some are meant to open, others to be carried like stones. You must learn which is which. And Chamalwak? He rose in rank. Quickly. But some said his face grew more hollow with each year. He built no home. He never married. And when he died, a tree was planted beside his burial stone, a species not native to the valley. Its roots, they say, grow unusually shallow. Tonight, as you drift into your own dreams, let them come gently. Do not rush to interpret. Do not fear their fire. Simply walk the field, and when the birds fly, let them fly. In Part 18, we will explore the sacred law of naming and the man who was punished for giving his son a name forbidden by the gods, not out of malice, but out of love. But for now, rest quietly. Let no judge enter your sleep. Let your dreams speak in the language only you can hear. Among the Aztecs, to name a child was to bind them to the stars. Names were not chosen from fondness or family tradition. They were drawn from the Tonalpohualli, the 260-day sacred calendar, which assigned each day a unique energy, a divine essence. The child was born into that energy, shaped by its current like a canoe upon a lake. A name was not a gift. It was a reading. Midwives, priests, and Tonalpuke, keepers of the calendar, worked together to assign it. The name had to reflect the day sign, the number, and the god governing the birth. It was not negotiable. But in the quiet district of Xochimilco, a humble reed worker named Coatl made a different choice. His wife, Ayaua, had died giving birth to their son. She had cried out once, then gone silent, her last breath escaping with the dawn mist. The boy arrived wailing, healthy, but alone. The midwife, pale and steady, prepared the water and the chants. The priest was summoned. The date was 5 Itzquintli, the 5th dog, a day governed by Xolotl, god of the underworld, transformation, and misfortune. The omens were troubling. The priest frowned. This child, he said, must carry a name of protection, a name tied to humility, sacrifice, perhaps Xolotzin or Itzquautli. Coatl listened, and then he whispered something else. His name will be Sitlali, star. The midwife froze. But that name belongs to another day, a Venus day, a day of high fate and heavy burden. I know. It is not his. I give it anyway. The priest warned him. If you defy the calendar, the boy will carry the weight of 2 fates, one from the gods, one from you. That conflict can twist the soul. Coatl bowed, then let it twist. But let him shine. He did not do it out of arrogance. He did it because his wife had once told him, during her pregnancy, if the baby is a boy, let his name be Light. Let him be my star. He had promised, and now with her gone, it was the only promise left to keep. For a time, nothing happened. The child grew, gentle and bright-eyed. He took to stories, not reeds, to sky-gazing, not carving. He spoke little, but laughed often. But when he turned 9, the omens began to collide. He fell into a fever on the day of the dog. Recovered. He wandered into the lake alone on the day of the star. Returned unharmed. Birds followed him. Dogs barked at him. Dreams came, vivid and strange. His teachers grew concerned. His calendar readings became unreadable. The scribes argued. The priests whispered. At last, the High Calendar Council summoned Coatl. The accusation, tonal na miktilistli, interference. With divine naming, they were not angry. They were mournful. You bent the stars, they said. Even in love, it is not permitted. Coatl did not deny it. I wanted him to have more than fate. I wanted him to have memory. The punishment was crafted carefully. He was not exiled, He was not beaten. But for one full calendar round, 260 days, Coatl was forbidden from speaking his son's name aloud. Not in greeting, not in prayer. Not even in his thoughts, lest they be caught by the wind. Each time he wished to address his son, he had to say, "You, whom I love." Each time he wished to call him, he had to light a small flame and whistle twice like a bird in mourning. He was also given a daily task to visit the house of day signs and copy by hand the glyph of that day. Each sign, each god, each fate. He filled scroll after scroll with suns and serpents, houses and jaguars, never once writing Titlali. It was said the boy did not cry. He understood. He would sit with his father in silence, pointing at stars, letting the wind speak for them. On the final day of the sentence, the boy brought his father a reed mat with a single star stitched into it. No words were exchanged. Coatl's voice, long unused for that sound, cracked when he finally said, "Chitlali." And the stars, it was said, twinkled just slightly brighter that night. The priests did not repeat their warnings. They knew some fates could not be folded. The boy grew older. He became a stargazer, not a priest. He kept both names within him. The dog, the star, the pull of roots and the urge to rise. And when he named his own child, he waited. He waited until the morning of birth, when the wind moved the reeds in just the right way. Tonight, if you listen quietly before sleep, you might hear a name in the stillness, one meant not for control but for remembrance. Let it come, let it glow, and know that even the gods sometimes allow the stars to be called by softer names. In part 19, we shall walk among the makers of masks, where a young artisan was punished, not for what his mask revealed, but for what it concealed. In the ceremonies of the Aztecs, not everything was meant to be seen directly. Some truths were too bright, too raw, too divine to face. And so, the people of Tenochtitlan mastered the art of the mask, not to deceive, but to reveal another kind of reality. There were masks for gods, for animals, for warriors, for rain, for fire. Some were used in sacred plays, some in war dances, others in funerals or the slow humming rites of the dry season. A mask allowed a man to become a god for a few moments, to speak with a voice not his own. To wear a mask was not to lie. It was to enter. And among the mask makers of the artisan district was a boy named Yohualan, meaning of the night. He was the youngest apprentice in the house of breath and form, a long, narrow workshop where clay and wood were transformed into sacred faces. The masters there were strict. They believed a mask was not decoration. It was a doorway. The grain of the wood had to match the god's temper. The shape of the eyes had to allow breath and prayer to pass together. Yohualan listened well. His fingers were precise, quick, quiet. He rarely spoke. But when he did, he asked questions no one expected. What does the god see through the mask? Do the masks remember the faces that wore them? Can a mask become more true than the man inside it? The others laughed, kindly at first, then uneasily. One day, a commission came from the priesthood of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the god of illusion, fate, and sorcery. A new mask was needed for the annual Night of Mirrors, a ritual in which one man was chosen to wear the mask and walk silently through the city. Those who looked upon him were expected to see themselves, and their hidden faults reflected back. The mask had to be powerful, mystical, disorienting. The master carver began the design. But late one night, when the others had gone to sleep, Yohualan slipped into the workshop. He was not trying to disobey. He was simply curious. He began to carve, not in wood, but in obsidian. Dangerous, brittle, sharp. He worked with water, firelight, and slow breath. Each curve of the cheek, each wrinkle of the brow, was deliberate. He did not model it after a god. He modeled it after a man, an old man, with tired eyes, a strong jaw, a closed mouth with just a hint of sorrow. He didn't know whose face it was, perhaps one he'd seen in a dream. When he was done, he left the mask on the bench. He did not sign it. The next morning, the master found it. He said nothing, but the mask was chosen. The ritual began 3 days later. A man of noble blood was chosen to wear it. He was dressed in black, adorned with white feathers, and walked in silence from dusk until dawn, passing through alleys, squares, and canals. People watched, and everywhere he went, they wept, not in fear, not in joy, but in recognition. Something in the face moved them. They saw shame, exhaustion, grief. Some said they saw their fathers. Others said they saw themselves as they might be in their last year of life. Even the high priests lowered their heads. When the ritual ended, the mask was returned to the temple, and questions began. Who carved this? Why does it resemble no god? What spirit entered this work? The workshop master tried to avoid the answer, but eventually, Yohualan was named. He was summoned, not to be praised, but to be judged. The accusation, Expantia Zayacatl Tlacayatl, creating a mask that conceals rather than transforms. The Council of Ritual Artisans, along with 2 priests and a calendar reader, sat in circle. One asked, "Did you know this mask would cause sorrow?" "No." "Did you mean to reflect humanity rather than divinity?" "I carved what felt true." "But the purpose was not truth," said another. "It was transcendence." Yohualan looked down. "It was meant to be a god's face," said the eldest judge. "But instead, it became too human. They could not destroy the mask. It had become a sacred object now, feared, respected, stored in a shadowed chamber behind a mirror. So they chose another path. Yohualan was allowed to stay in the workshop, but for a full year, he was forbidden to carve eyes. He could shape cheeks, lips, brows. He could sand and polish, but each mask's gaze had to be finished by another. "You made them too real," they said. "Now you must learn restraint." It was a difficult lesson, but Yohualan did not resist. He watched the others. He learned how subtle differences in eye width, angle, and depth could shift a face from hopeful to haunted. He began to understand the danger of accuracy. After a year, he was given a block of cedar. He carved carefully, and when it came time to carve the eyes, he paused. He turned the mask over and left the eye holes open, not shaped, not expressive, just clean openings. The mask was worn by a dancer during the rain month. No tears were shed, but the wind moved through the eye holes like breath. It was enough. Tonight, as you close your eyes, think of the mask you wear for the world, and the one you keep for yourself. Let them rest side by side. Let them breathe. And know that in Tenochtitlan, the truest faces were sometimes the ones carved in silence. In part 20, we will enter the court of marriage once more, where a widow was punished not for mourning her husband, but for mourning him too long. In the Aztec world, even sorrow had a season. Grief was not hidden nor rushed. It was honored through rites, wails, offerings, and silence. But it was also bound by the calendar, by custom, and by the needs of the living. To mourn was necessary. To mourn too long was dangerous. It was said that if one held onto the dead for too many moons, they could drag the soul back from the path to Mictlan, the 9-layered underworld. This did not bring comfort. It brought confusion. The dead would wander. The living would lose sleep. The household would fall out of sync. And so, rituals were set. The first 9 days were for raw grief. Public, loud, often guided by a mourning priestess. The next year was for honoring, with offerings on calendar days tied to the deceased's name and birth sign. After that, the soul was expected to settle, the mourners too. But there was one woman who did not settle. Her name was Ixtaca, which meant secret. She was a potter's wife in the mid-southern district, known for her quiet skill and her gentle laugh. Her husband, Ometekutli, had died during a market journey, struck suddenly by illness on the road to Tlaxcala. They had been married for 11 years. When his body returned, Ixtaca followed the rites perfectly. She wept, fasted burned copal for 9 days. She offered tamales and maize cakes on each moon cycle. She placed his favorite carved stone by the hearth. But when the year ended, she did not stop. She kept the house in mourning cloth. She refused suitors despite being young, with no children. She whispered his name at dawn, poured water before each meal, and sang the same song he once hummed while glazing clay. Neighbors grew concerned. At first, they called it devotion, then disturbance. Visitors to her stall said her eyes looked distant. The flowers she painted on pottery darkened. Some said they felt a coldness when near her, like the edge of nightfall at midday. Her sister spoke with her. "It is time," she said. "You must let him go. If you keep calling him, he will forget the road." But Ixtaka only smiled. "He was mine," she said. "Still is." One day, during the month of Tepalhuitl, the festival of mountains, she placed a painted vessel outside her home. It showed 2 figures walking hand in hand, both with half-shadowed faces, 1 foot each in the world of the living, 1 in the dead. It was seen by a passing priest. Within days, she was summoned before the Council of Cycles, a group of ritual keepers charged with maintaining harmony between seasons, souls, and signs. They did not accuse her of witchcraft. They accused her of teolotl neltilistli, soul tethering beyond permitted time. "You have mourned well," said the elder priestess. "But now you mourn wrongly." "I have done no harm," Ixtaka replied. "You have created imbalance," said another. "The dead must move on, and so must you." She was not condemned, but she was given a penance. For 260 days she was forbidden to speak her husband's name. Instead, she had to speak names of life. She was assigned daily to visit markets, gardens, and infant ceremonies. At each she had to offer a blessing aloud, not for what was lost, but for what began. She poured water at baby naming rites. She scattered petals at replanting fields. She learned to recite joy, even when her heart was not in it. At first she stumbled. The words caught. But slowly, something shifted. She painted again, soft greens, gentle yellows, not flowers of grief, but of return. On the final day of her sentence, she made a new vessel. No faces. Just a circle of birds, each in flight. She placed it on her husband's old altar, and that night she dreamed of him. He stood on a distant hill, smiling, nodding once, then turned and walked away. She never called his name again, but she spoke, it in her sleep sometimes, not in grief but in gratitude, and the wind no longer chilled the room when she did. Tonight, if your own heart carries a weight, let it rest beside you. Not to forget, not to erase, but to allow breath again. In part 21, we will descend into the sacred kitchens of Tenochtitlan, where a cook was punished not for poison, but for making a dish too delicious for a fasting day. In Tenochtitlan, food was not only sustenance, it was ceremony, symbol, and sometimes seduction. The Aztecs did not take their meals lightly, especially during sacred times. Certain days, even entire months, were ruled by fasting and restraint. These were not times of punishment, but of purification. The body was a vessel, the calendar a guide, and the stomach a doorway to the spirit. And so it was that during Nemontemi, the 5 final ambiguous days of the solar calendar, people across the city ate only the simplest of foods: plain amaranth cakes, unsalted maize gruel, and boiled greens picked from temple gardens. No salt, no chili, no cacao. These were days of caution, days when the boundaries between life and death were said to thin. Even laughter was softened. In the bustling southern district, nestled between a flower market and a shrine to Xochipilli, lived a cook named Tlacotl. His name meant half-serpent, but his nature was kind. He had been raised among flavors. His grandmother taught him the scent of toasted maize before he learned to speak. His first gift to a lover was a perfectly balanced tamal, wrapped in orchid leaves, and when the city named him keeper of the hearth for the market priests, it was not just for his recipes. It was for the feeling his food gave, that all was right, if only for a moment. But good intentions, like good seasoning, can go too far. On the first day of Nemontemi, Tlacotl closed his stall as expected. He swept his hearth clean, stored his spices, and lit a single candle in front of the fire god's altar. But as the sun lowered, a group of travelers from Lake Chalco appeared at his door, drenched from rain, weary, shivering. "We heard you cook healing stews," said one. "We bring no coin, only thanks." Tlacotl looked at their hands. One had cracked knuckles. Another held the hand of a child whose teeth chattered from cold. He hesitated. Then he lit the fire. He told himself he would follow the rules. No seasoning, no excess, just warmth. He simmered maize with squash, adding wild greens for color. But then, almost by habit, his hand reached for a pinch of roasted cacao nibs just to thicken the broth. A sliver of smoked chili, barely enough to scent the steam, and a single drop of maguey syrup to cut the bitterness. He did not taste it, but when the bowls were served, the travelers wept. "It tastes like memory," whispered the child. Word spread, not from the travelers themselves, but from the scent. It drifted on the air, winding through alleys and up temple steps. Even those fasting in silence stirred at its call. The next morning, a novice priest arrived. "Did you cook last night?" he asked. Tlacotl nodded. "A small meal, a kindness." The novice sniffed the air. "Kindness has aroma," he said, "and that aroma has reached ears that cannot be ignored." Within a day, Tlacotl was summoned to the Council of Purity and Proportion. The chamber was quiet, lined with censers of unlit copal. 3 elder priests presided, each dressed in linen gray, faces stern but not unkind. "You are not accused of malice," said the first, "but of imbalance. You disrupted a fast," said the second, "not through abundance, but through evocation." The third, a woman with a voice like dried leaves, asked, "Do you know what happens when flavor stirs longing during sacred silence?" Tlacotl bowed his head. "I fed hungry travelers. I broke no law." "You broke rhythm," she replied, "and rhythm is the spine of the cosmos." They deliberated until the candle burned halfway down. The punishment, for 1 tonalpahwali, 260 days, Tlacotl was forbidden from using any ingredient with natural flavor. No chili, no cacao, no honey, no herbs. He was allowed only boiled grains, unseasoned roots, water, and stone-ground meal. He could cook, but not tempt. The first weeks were agony, not for hunger but for absence. He missed the scent of warming tortillas, the little dance of lime with salt, the murmur of toasted sesame. Worse, his customers vanished, some out of respect, others out of boredom. Yet Tlacotl endured. He began to study. He spoke with ritual fasters, learning what each bland food represented. He studied food omens, discovering why garlic was once forbidden to warriors before battle. He learned of the quiet flavors, textures, temperatures, the mouthfeel of cool versus hot, soft versus firm. He made porridges that sang in silence. And slowly people returned, not for delight, but for peace. They began calling his dishes sleeping flavors, food that did not wake the tongue, but settled the soul. When his sentence ended, Tlacotl did not return to excess. Instead, he invented a new offering, the Nemontemi bowl, a dish served only during the 5 forbidden days, made from foraged greens, toasted amaranth, and rainwater broth. No spice, but every sip held the hush of reflection. It became tradition, and travelers still came, some to eat, some simply to sit nearby and breathe. Tonight, as you drift into dreams, imagine the scent of broth made with patience, the steam that does not distract but comforts, the silence that is full, not empty. Even the gods, it is said, sometimes close their eyes and savor simplicity. In part 22, We return to the scribe's table, where a writer was punished not for what he created, but for recording memories the elders wished to forget. To write was to build eternity, one glyph at a time. In the Aztec Empire, the tlacuilo, or scribe, held a sacred role, not just as a writer, but as a weaver of memory, a custodian of time. They were trained from youth in the Calmacac, where they learned to draw the gods, count the stars, and translate history into images and symbols. Scribes did not simply record what happened. They chose what would be remembered, and sometimes they remembered too well. The scribe in question was named Chimalpopoca, the smoking shield. He was quiet, elderly, with long fingers stained with soot and indigo ink. For 4 decades, he served the House of Records at the southern base of the Templo Mayor. He had copied great wars, sacred marriages, strange eclipses. He had drawn the births of emperors, the fall of rebels, and once, a jaguar that danced during a drought. But one day, he made a decision that would unmake his position. He began to write a memory that had been forbidden. It was not a grand war or a divine failure. It was a massacre, small, quiet, and long buried. 40 years earlier, during a border dispute with a minor valley lord, a band of warriors had burned a village that had already surrendered. The act was swift, unsanctioned, and unrecorded, except Chimalpopoca had been there, then a young messenger tasked with observing and reporting. He had watched the smoke, heard the crying, and now in his final years he began to record it, not loudly, not publicly, just a few pages, tucked into a codex he was compiling about seasonal shifts in provincial rituals. But memory, even whispered, has weight. A junior reader found the passage. He took it to his instructor. The instructor hesitated, then brought it to the Council of Custodians. The verdict came quietly, without trial. Chimalpopoca was summoned. They did not accuse him of lying. They accused him of tlakia yankuik nenemi, watching what must no longer be seen. One elder said, "There is memory, and there is rot. You wrote the latter." Chimalpopoca replied, "I wrote what was." The room was still. Another counselor asked, "What did you hope would happen?" He smiled. That one day someone would ask, "Why did this happen?" They considered exile, silence, death. But he was old, and he had been loyal. So they chose a punishment they thought symbolic. For the rest of his life, Chimalpopoca was forbidden from writing words or history. Instead, he was assigned to draw only landscapes, mountains, rivers, clouds, nothing with names, nothing with time. They gave him blank codices and soft brushes. They placed him in a quiet chamber near the lake-facing wall. Each day, he painted hills. At first, it seemed a silencing. But slowly, visitors noticed the hills he drew were real and specific. The valleys he painted matched known sites of forgotten tragedy. The rivers curved around ruins unnamed on official maps. And on one page, the wind-blown trees curved in just the same way as those near the village that had burned. He obeyed the rule. He wrote no names, but he drew memory into the land. It is said that when he died, the final page of his last codex showed a single stone, half buried in earth, with 4 birds flying overhead. No glyph, no date, but the oldest scribes recognized the shape of the stone. They knew where it stood. They knew what had happened there, and they did not ask aloud. Tonight, as your eyes begin to close, remember this. Memory is not always written in ink. Sometimes it is whispered in wind, drawn in earth, carried in silence. Let your own memories settle, not to vanish, but to find peace. And so concludes this journey through 22 curious, gentle, and often bittersweet punishments of the Aztec world. Each tale, like each heartbeat before sleep, was meant not to excite but to soothe, to show that even in the harshest worlds, humanity lingers. In grief, in rhythm, in love, in flavor, and in memory. May your own night be gentle, May your dreams be deep, and may you awaken with the soft knowing that stories remember us too.